Activate sonic boom!
Who said the one who wears underwear outside and saves the world must be Superman? It could also be Peacemaker. You may not have heard of this superhero, because he's just a nobody in the 18th tier of DC Comics. As a superhero with no superpowers, Peacemaker has plenty of money power. Instead, he inherited countless portals from his dad, which allow him to enter any alternate dimension. Little did he know that a wonderful trip to a parallel universe would bring Peacemaker a huge trouble. In 2025, the superhero TV series Peacemaker starring John Cena finally got its sequel. As a spin-off of the Suicide Squad, this once obscure minor characters show has become DC Comics' flagship TV series. In the previous season, Peacemaker, who was supposed to be just a trivial side character among superheroes, beat the Justice League to it and foiled the aliens' conspiracy. Even though he saved the world, no one saw him as a real superhero. Chris went back to living a boring life. That night, he stepped into the alternate dimension his father left him. This place is connected to countless parallel universes. He originally wanted to walk his pet here, but the eagle had flown away somewhere. Chris followed the sound and arrived in front of a familiar door. To his surprise, there was an identical helmet to his own placed in the cabinet outside the door. Driven by curiosity, Chris opened the door. He was shocked to find that in this parallel world, he and his father seemed to be real superheroes. Half a year later, as the Suicide Squad scandal was made public, Chris finally regained his freedom under the pressure of public opinion, and becoming a real superhero was his obsession. Early that morning, he took Charles's car to a toy store. In fact, the inside was actually the interview site for superheroes. As a sponsor of the Justice League, Lord Tech specially held this recruitment event, and Green Lantern and Hawkgirl became the interviewers. Whether it was on purpose or by accident, the other party turned on the speakerphone.
Peacemaker, or do you prefer Chris? Oh, either's fine.
Chris endured it helplessly and then began to introduce his skills. Although he possesses top-tier human marksmanship and powerful close combat skills, but for the sake of its own image, the Justice League didn't need a superhero with violent tendencies, someone who had even been in prison. Under the interviewer's continuous humiliation, Chris rushed out of the room. The arrogance deep in the bones of these self-proclaimed superior superheroes really annoyed him. Back home, Chris grew angrier the more he thought about it. He entered the alternate dimension again, and then walked to the door leading to the parallel universe. He pressed the door lock password without hesitation. Chris looked around and saw their heroic reports all over the walls. Even the house was much more luxurious. Chris walked outside, and just then, a car drove over. As the car door opened, Chris finally got a clear look at the person inside. It was his biological brother Keith. But in his own universe, Chris had accidentally killed Keith. When he was a child, this not only became a lifelong pain for him, but also the root cause of his enmity with his father. And wasn't this harmonious life right now exactly what he had always dreamed of? Drunk, Chris returned to his room. Looking at the photo in the frame, he wondered, did he even have a girlfriend in this world? But just then, his counterpart from the parallel world appeared quietly behind him. Fortunately, Chris reacted quickly. Taking advantage of the other's inattention, he fled into the alternate dimension, but his parallel counterpart was clearly unwilling to let it go. He was even equipped with flying gear. Chris had no way to fight back. Just as the other was about to launch a fatal attack, Chris accidentally knocked them flying and killed them. Panicked, he found a corner to hide the body, then hurried back to his original universe. Early the next morning, he told Charles about his ability to travel between parallel universes through the alternate dimension. Charles knew immediately that something was wrong. It turned out he had received inside information that their friend Eagly was monitoring the area nearby 24 hours a day. But General Flag didn't trust Eagly enough, so he arranged for another man named Flurry to keep an eye on Chris as well. Now, if Chris opened the alternate dimension again, the energy fluctuations generated would alert the two immediately. This might give Flag an opportunity to have him sent to prison on charges of endangering public safety, and once there, it would be Flag's territory. Just then, another of his friends, Adrian, arrived at his home. Adrian was an expert in disposing of corpses. After some hesitation, Chris still opened the portal to the alternate dimension. On the other end, Eagly immediately detected the energy fluctuation, but luckily his superior told him to wait and see first, not to act rashly. Soon, Chris and Adrian got to work. Although Peacemaker had killed countless people, dismembering himself was still mentally hard to accept. Suddenly, a mobile phone slipped from the pocket to the ground, and Chris put it into his own pocket. Then he turned on the incinerator and burned everything to ashes. Just as he was filled with emotions, a strange creature broke in, but under Chris's threat, it politely closed the door and left. After finishing all this, Chris returned home and turned on the phone of the other himself. In the photo album, himself lived a happy life and had even married Amy. But in reality, neither of them had broken the ice. And Amy's life was also like a quagmire. At the same time, Fleury received an order from his superior. He was to sneak into Chris's house while Chris was away, and find the location of the alternate dimension. But Chris knew nothing about this. Tonight was his gathering day with friends. The scene shifts. As the door is pried open, the team files in. With an energy detection device, they quickly locked onto the entrance of the alternate dimension. But they didn't know that there was another member living in this house. Eagly's combat power was fierce, and the entire special team was no match for it. In just a moment, only Fleury was left at the scene. After dealing with the intruders, Eagly returned to the house, while Chris was partying wildly with his friends now. Soon, the drunk Chris returned home. He didn't notice the changes in the house, and alcohol couldn't fill the emptiness in his heart either. He picked up the phone of the other himself, and wanted to send a message to his wife in the parallel world, but since they were separated by a time-space, it was impossible. After some hesitation, Chris still opened the door to the alternate dimension, and entered that parallel universe where life was happy. But as soon as he entered, he heard the anxious voices of his father and eldest brother. It turned out that the two had been frantically searching for himself these days. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket rang. It was a message from his wife, but a broken heart emoji appeared on the screen. Chris wondered about his relationship with his wife, but under the influence of alcohol, he soon fell into a deep sleep. Before long, Chris was woken up by his eldest brother Keith. Obviously, Keith didn't realize that the man in bed wasn't his real brother. Chris picked up the phone, and found that his wife Harcourt in this world had sent a text message last night, asking to meet him at her workplace. The two seemed to have been in a cold war for a long time. Chris didn't dare to delay, but himself in this world had a very fashionable dressing style. But when he walked out of the door, he realized that he didn't know where Harcourt worked. Fortunately, his eldest brother wasn't very smart. Under Chris's deception, Keith thought that the other person had amnesia from drinking too much last night. Chris opened the garage. The cool motorcycle in front of him was definitely the bike of his dreams. Putting on the helmet, Chris raced along the road at high speed, and Peacemaker in this world had countless fans. Soon, Chris arrived at ARGUS. Unlike the organization in the original universe that specialized in monitoring superhumans, ARGUS here specialized in handling aftercare work for superheroes, which was equivalent to the logistics department of the Justice League, and the security level of the building was also very high. Chris anxiously scanned his iris. Fortunately, no matter which parallel universe himself was from, their physical features were identical. Chris reached the third floor. Looking at Harcourt not far away, he was organizing his words for what to say next. A man named Rick stepped forward. He was General Flagg's son. In the previous installment, as a villain, Rick had been killed by Chris. Just as he was feeling uncomfortable all over, Harcourt walked over. She was surprised by Chris's arrival, and the two hugged. But Rick in the corner looked as if fire would shoot out of his eyes. Watching the two leave, he tried to follow them quietly, but unexpectedly revealed his whereabouts. Later, Chris and Harcourt went outside. To Chris's relief, their relationship wasn't as bad as he had imagined. Looking at the happy look on Harcourt's face, Chris couldn't help but think that himself in this other world was simply a jerk. Harcourt also noticed that the man seemed to have really changed. The Peacemaker of the past had been extremely arrogant, and had never even said sorry to her. Chris hoped to get a chance to make amends and prove that he was different now. But he didn't notice that the crowd around them was fleeing in all directions. Suddenly, an explosion occurred right in front of them. They had no time to react and were blown over. It took them a long time to recover and stand up. Harcourt said that this must be the work of the Sons of Liberty, a terrorist organization that sought to overthrow the government. As soon as she finished speaking, voices from the nearby city hall shouted that they had planted bombs there, and that all irrelevant people should leave immediately. The police nearby had already called for backup. Chris saw about 10 people in succession, carrying black bags and entering the city hall. If all those bags contained bombs, their power would be enough to destroy the entire neighborhood. Chris wouldn't stand by and do nothing. He went to the adjacent building, climbed onto the roof, and then jumped into the city hall. The sound of breaking glass caught the attention of one of the terrorists. Just as the man was about to go check, Chris killed him with a single axe strike. Shortly after, he went downstairs. The terrorist didn't notice Chris behind him, and Chris took advantage of the surprise to take him down easily. A woman's scream made the other terrorists realize something was wrong. Chris hid behind a printer and caught them off guard. In a panic, one man even accidentally shot his own teammate. Right after that, Chris kicked the man unconscious, grabbed 2 pencils casually, hid behind the door, and killed another terrorist. At the same time, the remaining terrorists set up the bombs and prepared to leave, but the next second, they ran into Chris, and their fate was predictable. Later, Chris arrived at the hall, and found the bomb on the ground had already started counting down. He hurriedly pulled out 2 wires. It seemed the bomb-making technology in this parallel universe was quite poor. The remaining terrorists were about to escape by helicopter, when a dark figure rushed over quickly, the helicopter turned into a ball of fire and crashed to the ground. The person who came was Keith. Their heroic actions won cheers from passers-by, and even Harcourt couldn't help but hug him tightly. For the first time, Chris understood what it felt like to be a superhero. On the other side, Fleury reported the previous night's situation to his superior. In the recent battle between Superman and Luthor, just a single space rift almost turned Metropolis into a ruin. Therefore, the alternate dimension in Chris's home must be nipped in the bud. But Chris, who was in another dimension, knew nothing about this. He didn't dare to stay in this universe forever. After all, he still had friends in his own world. To avoid suspicion, Chris returned to his original universe through the alternate dimension. After returning home, Chris found traces of a fight everywhere. Sensing something was wrong, he got up and went to the kitchen, only to find Eagly was destroying his refrigerator. But at the same time, ARGUS agents had surrounded his house. Luckily, Eagly sent him a message secretly. Chris rushed into the utility room in a panic, found a silver handbag, then took Eagly and left through the back door. The falconer found Eagly's droppings on the ground. True to his profession, he quickly found Eagly hovering in the air using the scent. Seeing the falconer was about to pull the trigger, Eagly still chose to stand with his friend. He kicked the falconer to the ground with one foot. On the other side, Chris was fleeing desperately, but he was still spotted by the judo master. The judo master was agile, so Chris could only barely hold on with brute strength. But the handbag was kicked away. The judo master clung tightly to Chris. After a struggle, Chris used his strong body to successfully knock the judo master unconscious. Seeing the judo master was unconscious, Chris picked up the handbag and left the scene. Then he sent his location to Charles, planning to take Eagly and escape quickly. Just then, Eagly took the chance to call. It turned out ARGUS's trip was for this portal, and since Eagly was an expert in password cracking, he was afraid he couldn't delay much longer. Faced with Charles's questioning, Chris had to tell him about the parallel universe. Although Charles was a bit incredulous, as his best friend, he still took Chris to the depths of the forest. In front of an abandoned wooden house, there was no time to waste. He found a door and placed the handbag on the ground. On the other side, Charlie also went to the original portal and connected the decoder to the combination lock. At the same time, after Chris's operation, the teleportation device also lit up with yellow electric arcs. Shortly after, the electric arcs began to spread. Over the entire wooden door, a huge gravitational force hit, and Chris hurried to run out of the wooden house. After some time, Chris returned to the house. The originally ordinary wooden door had now become a portal capable of traveling through time and space. Learning that his men had found nothing, General Flagg, as if he had anticipated this situation, went to Harcourt's home. Harcourt had been living in a daze every day since losing her job. General Flagg offered to reinstate her job, on the condition that Harcourt bring Peacemaker to him. On the other side, Charles asked about the differences between the parallel world and the world he lived in. Chris talked about how he and Harcourt were married in that world, how his father and brother were still alive, and even more absurdly, how he had killed his counterpart in the parallel world. All of this shattered Charles's worldview, but he still advised Chris to accept reality. After all, if God had let him be born in this universe, there must be a reason for it. But Chris thought that after suffering so much, maybe heaven had finally taken pity on him, which was why he had gotten such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Shortly after, Chris sent Harcourt a text message, hoping to meet her. After some hesitation, Harcourt still walked out of her house. Flagg had already brought people to wait here for a long time, and Harcourt finally chose to betray Chris. At the same time, the falconer was dancing around a bonfire. Shortly after, he took blood from the wound on his forehead and drew a pattern of an eagle in the sand. The next second, the falconer's spiritual consciousness flew into the air. He quickly located Eagly, and Chris's wooden house was naturally exposed as well. After learning Chris's hiding place, the falconer took action immediately. He injected a tube of medicine into a dead mouse, then threw it in front of Peacemaker's safe house. Eagly thought it was a windfall. It was just about to enjoy the delicious food alone when Adrian interrupted it. Soon, the mouse fell into a fox's mouth. The fox swallowed it in one bite, but the next second, it foamed at the mouth and fell to the ground. Seeing his plan fail, the falconer took out his treasure, a thick, long hunting rifle, and aimed it at Eagly in the air. The falconer finally got what he wanted, but just as he was about to take his trophy away, another eagle suddenly attacked him from behind. Shortly after, more and more eagles surrounded him, and soon, the falconer was killed by the eagles. The scene shifts. General Flagg uses Harcourt as bait to lure Chris to meet him in the park, and he has already set up a tight trap around the area. But Chris is no ordinary person. He blends into the crowd, making it impossible for the judo master to find a shooting angle. Chris walks up to Harcourt and spots the bug on her chest. It turns out that in the meeting text Harcourt sent to Chris, there was a danger word exclusive to the two of them. Even so, he still came to the appointment, only to ask that question that had been troubling him in person. He wants to know how much he means to Harcourt. but he doesn't get the answer he wants from her. Perhaps Chris has already made up his mind to go live in another parallel universe. Just then, Reforges suddenly launches an attack. Chris is surrounded by them and loses all hope of breaking out. General Flag orders them to kill him. Bordeaux uses his mechanical eye to lock onto Chris. There is almost no chance he will miss the next shot. Just then, Harcourt acts decisively and subdues Chris with her agile skills. Soon, Chris lost consciousness under the rear naked choke, and was then taken back to Reforges headquarters. Harcourt called Eagly into a room without surveillance. He knew that Flag, in order to avenge his son's death, would have Chris eliminated. The only way now was to enter Chris's fingerprints and arrest records into the system. This way, Flag wouldn't dare to abuse his power to take revenge openly. As expected, Chris was being severely beaten by Flag in the interrogation room, and Chris didn't fight back. Eagly hurriedly entered Chris's information into Reforges' system, and this action caught Bordeaux's attention. He hurried to the interrogation room and told Flag about it. Soon, Adrian and Charles arrived at Reforges and picked up Chris, whose face was covered in blood. The judo master followed them secretly, ready to find their hiding place. In the car, Chris couldn't understand why Harcourt had knocked him out. Maybe Harcourt wanted to please Flag by doing so. With his level of understanding, he clearly couldn't see Harcourt's real intention. Chris had already made up his mind. He would say goodbye to this world. Little did he know that the judo master had been following them all the way. After getting the location, Flag hurriedly sent men to rush to the wooden house. Chris left a farewell letter for his friends. At the same time, Eagly returned home, with a severed finger in its mouth. Chris turned on the teleportation device. After a series of operations, countless golden electric arcs appeared around the doorframe. Shortly after, Chris and Eagly entered the portal. But Chris didn't have the habit of closing the door behind him, so the judo master followed them in as well. At the same time, Chris was already prepared to start a new life in another universe. Soon, Charles and Adrian found the farewell letter left behind, and everyone felt pained at the loss of a close friend. Moreover, Chris had left the teleportation device behind. If they handed it over to Reforges, this merit would be enough to let everyone live the life they wanted. But Harcourt asked Charles if he had ever seen Chris use this device, because she wanted to bring Chris back. After a brief discussion, the group went to Vigilante Adrian's home. This was because, among the four, Reforges still didn't know the Vigilante's real identity. When they entered the basement, the other three were stunned. The room was filled with countless bags of flour and stacks of cash. It turned out that every time he raided a drug dealer's den, he would collect the stolen goods here. They kept saying it was stolen money and couldn't be touched, but their hands never stopped moving. Shortly after, Harcourt opened another door. Charles placed the space teleportation device inside and started operating it, mimicking Chris's actions. The next second, countless golden electric arcs appeared in front of them. Obviously, it worked. After a moment of processing, everyone was covered in flour as they walked into the alternate dimension. Soon, Charles found Peacemaker's helmet in the corner. Clearly, behind this door was the other world Chris had mentioned. As the door opened, they looked at the walls covered with trophies and photos, and understood why Chris had chosen to stay here. Suddenly, Keith's voice sounded. Luckily, Keith's intelligence was just as low as Chris's. He didn't notice anything different about Harcourt in front of him. Then Keith offered to take him to Reforges headquarters. Harcourt guessed Chris must be there, so she agreed. This left the other three stunned. Adrian wanted to find his counterpart in this world, so he left the villa. Soon, Harcourt arrived at Reforges. But as soon as he entered the gate, the police dogs started barking. He realized it must be the smell of flour on his body. Security guards took him to a quarantine room to prepare for a toxicology test. Just then, Chris pushed the door open, and their eyes met. He realized that the Harcourt in front of him didn't belong to this world. At the same time, Adrian arrived at his home in this world. Although some of the decorations were different, he was actually able to open the basement door with the key in his hand. But when he pushed the door open, the interior was different from his own basement.
What the fuck? Who are you? Why are you here?
Adrian quickly took off his hood and then explained what had happened.
Hey! Oh, Spider-Man meme! Hey!
On the other side, General Flag was equally frantic. Since Chris went missing, Harcourt and the others had also disappeared. Faced with this situation, he had to prepare to go to the prison to seek help from someone. Luther, a genius, said he could quickly create a device that could accurately locate the portal, and the price was helping him transfer to a prison with a better environment. The two hit it off immediately, but it was clear Luther had more than just this goal. The scene shifts. Chris walks into the quarantine room and asks Harcourt why she came here to disrupt his life. Harcourt clearly knew how he felt about her, but she always avoided the topic. now that he had entered a better world, and met another Harcourt who was willing to spend the rest of her life with him. She had to bring people here to destroy his current happy life. Just then, a security guard walked in and said it was all a misunderstanding. Harcourt could leave. At the same time, Adrian was having a great time with his counterpart. Unexpectedly, their personalities and hobbies were almost identical. They liked the same colors and foods, and even agreed that hair looked best at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The only difference was their relationship with Peacemaker. Adrian in the real world loved to contradict Peacemaker the most. They could be said to be mortal enemies, but his counterpart in the parallel world was best friends with Peacemaker. On the other side, Charles planned to wander around this world. But strangely, every passerby looked at him as if they had seen a ghost, just as Charles was confused.
What got out? I'm black!
What?
Harcourt also noticed something unusual. None of the staff on this floor were people of color. Suddenly, Harcourt from this world came behind them, and ordered the security guards to arrest her counterpart from the parallel world. Meanwhile, Eagly in the villa also encountered a crisis. White Dragon suddenly returned home, and noticed the uninvited guest behind him. A kitchen knife pierced Eagly's palm in an instant. In a panic, he told White Dragon everything, that Chris had killed Peacemaker from this world and was pretending to be him. At the same time, Peacemaker realized that he had traveled to a parallel universe ruled by fascism. Looking at the portrait of the Führer on the corner of the wall, and the approaching security guards, Chris suddenly attacked. With Harcourt's cooperation, he knocked the nearby security guards to the ground. The two finally escaped from Argus. They quickly fled the area on a motorcycle. On the other side, Charles was in an even worse situation. Being black, he was forced to work all day in a concentration camp. With no chance of escaping, faced with pursuit and blockades, Charles rolled into a villa to hide, then jumped into the swimming pool, but the pursuers still refused to let him go. At the critical moment, the judo master made a dramatic appearance, and rescued Charles with his quick wits. On the other side, because Eagly had let slip, White Dragon learned that Chris in this world was from another parallel universe. What worried him even more was that if this matter was exposed, and Argus found out he had a portal to an alternate dimension, it would bring huge trouble. The only solution now was to eliminate these dimension travelers quickly. Charles and the judo master sneaked into a villa, and luckily the owner wasn't home. But the judo master knew that if they wanted to return to their own world, they had to cooperate with Peacemaker's friends. At the same time, Chris was stopped by police cars. Looking at the police surrounding them, both he and Harcourt fell into despair. Keith and White Dragon descended from above, and White Dragon took down all the police at the scene in an instant. The scene shifts back to the real world. With Luther's introduction, Flag found a prisoner named Harkness. Harkness had once fought against Superman alongside Luther, and was an expert in spatial dimension research. Harkness connected to the military satellite, and soon detected a spatial energy fluctuation on the outskirts of Washington, which was where the portal was. Flag quickly gathered his men. This time, he was determined to get rid of Peacemaker once and for all. At the same time, Chris and Harcourt, who were in another dimension, were taken back home, and White Dragon interrogated them about how they had arrived there. Chris said it was all an accident, and that he hadn't intended to kill the Chris from this world. He had chosen to stay here simply because he craved the warmth this family brought him. Although Keith was still angry about his brother's death, White Dragon's resolve was starting to waver. Just then, a knock came at the door. It was the police, come to investigate Chris's whereabouts. White Dragon said he knew nothing, so the police had to leave the villa temporarily. Not far away, Charles and the judo master were quietly watching everything, and Adrian and his counterpart had also arrived. They planned to sneak into the villa when the time was right, then use the portal to return to their own world. At this moment, White Dragon didn't want to make things difficult for them. After learning Chris had 2 more friends here, he decided to take them in temporarily. He would let them go back to their original world once everyone was gathered, and ordered them never to return. But this decision angered Keith. White Dragon said that the Chris of this world was a jerk, and if heaven had decided to punish him this way, he would only choose to accept it. Chris was deeply moved by these just words, but suddenly a figure appeared outside the window. 2 Adrians broke through the glass, and the room instantly fell into chaos. This commotion caught the attention of the police outside, who immediately drew their guns and moved in. Chris froze in place, never expecting things to escalate to this level. There was no time for sorrow. The police broke through the door, and the 2 Adrians drew their pistols to fight back. Chris and Harcourt went to the study, opened the portal to the alternate dimension, and everyone hurried in. But Chris stared blankly at White Dragon's portrait. Urged by Harcourt, he came to his senses and ran toward the portal, only to be stopped by Keith halfway. Keith punched and kicked Chris. At the critical moment, Eagly stepped in and pecked at Keith, sending him fleeing. Harcourt took the chance to hold Keith down, and Adrian stabbed him with a dagger. All this was more than Chris could bear. He crawled to Keith's side, looking at his dying elder brother, and childhood memories flooded back. Was he doomed to be alone no matter which universe he was in? He hugged Keith and wept bitterly, but the shrill sound of police sirens was already echoing in his ears. Charles came over, and with his comfort, Chris pulled himself together, but Harcourt raised her gun and aimed at Keith's head. He was the only one in this universe who knew about the alternate dimension, and this was the only way to ensure no one would come for revenge later. But just then, the police rushed in. With Adrian's cover, Chris and his friends returned to their original universe. He put away the teleportation device, then walked out the door, only to find the house surrounded by ARGUS agents. Calmly, he threw the teleportation device to them, wanting to exchange it for his friend's freedom. He was then escorted into a police car, taking all the blame upon himself. Once again, he fell into Flag's hands. The other side wouldn't let this go easily. Since Flag got the teleportation device, he had assembled a large team to explore the world behind each portal. He claimed it was to alleviate resource pressure and help humans find a new home, but anyone with eyes could see that, apart from Harcourt and a few others, half of the team members were former subordinates of Luther. Their unguarded invasion of other universes like this was truly dangerous. At this moment, Peacemaker was behind bars. The death of his father and brother had hit him too hard. Maybe prison was his final destination. Chris isolated himself, even refusing all visits from his friends. Charles found Adrian. As Chris's best friend, Adrian had locked himself in the basement for a week. Charles's purpose for this visit was to hire a top lawyer for Chris, which required a large sum of money, but Adrian believed the money was ill-gotten gains. After all, he saw himself as a good guy. However, he finally agreed after Charles's persuasion. Soon, Chris was released from prison after posting bail, but he didn't go home or meet his friends. Instead, he rented a room in a motel. On the other side, the exploration of the alternate dimension became increasingly dangerous. The judo master almost fell into a black hole. Some of these worlds didn't even have the slightest need to be visited. Even more terrifyingly, they had also strayed into a zombie universe. Soon, the number of casualties from the alternate dimension exploration became more and more severe, watching their teammates fall one after another. Fleury and Sasha began to doubt whether all this was meaningful, but that afternoon, Harcourt pushed open an ordinary-looking door, and found that the environment inside was highly similar to Earth. It could become a second home for humans, but what they didn't know was that Rick had no intention of benefiting all of humanity. Instead, he planned to turn this place into a prison. It would hold uncontrollable superpowered beings like Superman, or criminals from Arkham Asylum who frequently escaped from prison. Only then could the interests of more ordinary people be protected. That night, Sasha found Harcourt and told her Flag's true purpose. If they didn't stop him now, given Flag's vengeful nature, Peacemaker would become one of the first inhabitants of this prison. But since Chris was released from prison, no one had been able to find him. Harcourt suddenly remembered that ARGUS had once implanted a positioning chip in Chris's head. They could locate him as long as they reactivated it. The next day, while at work, Sasha went to ARGUS's computer, opened the chip's positioning permission, and learned that Peacemaker was at a motel in the South District. The scene shifts. Chris is about to go out when he runs into Charles, who has come to find him. He hurries toward his car, but the next second, Adrian restrains him, but Chris has long lost his will to fight. Instead, he even hopes Flag will lock him up in the parallel world's prison. The reason he's so dispirited is simply that he thinks he's cursed. At the age of 8, he killed his brother. In middle age, he killed his father. And after switching to another world, he doomed his relatives to death too. He's afraid this curse will get his friends killed. But Charles has already seen through the essence of the matter. When he was 8, his father told him to hit his brother. He knew it was wrong, but he did it anyway. And traveling to the parallel universe was wrong in itself, which Chris knew very well, yet he still couldn't resist the temptation. So all this has nothing to do with a curse, it's just one wrong choice after another. And with these friends, he can correct his mistakes time and time again. Somewhere along the way, fate has bound them together. After going through so much, everyone has reached a consensus. Instead of clinging to ARGUS and barely surviving, they'd rather build a new career together. A week later, Adrian opened his private vault, and they used the stolen money to start a security company, free from ARGUS's control. Their lives finally got back on track. Even Fleury and the judo master joined them. Moreover, Chris and Harcourt's relationship is growing closer. But just as everything is moving in a good direction, a group of soldiers suddenly kidnap Chris and take him to an abandoned factory. And the mastermind behind all this is Flag. Chris is forced into the portal by 2 soldiers. Just as he's confused, the soldiers unlock his shackles, then they left without looking back. Chris stood up and looked around. This place seemed no different from Earth. But suddenly, low roars came from the jungle. It was clear that this place was overrun by monsters. To find out if Chris could escape danger, we'll have to wait for the 3rd season to reveal it. If you like my video, please subscribe to the channel. See you next time.